Hello and welcome to the Tournament Center. I'm Randy Buehler here with Brian David-Marshall. Day one of Pro Tour Berlin is in the books. Big field this weekend and fully 160 players have advanced to day two.
Wow.
160 of them. Only two undefeateds though. Leading the way, Kenny Oberg. Kenny Oberg, a Swedish player, got 30-ish lifetime pro points, often seen around the dealer tables at Grand Prix. He's kind of been around for a while, and you got to get a look at the deck. Tezzeret. He's playing the Tezzerator. That's what you expected to be on top after day one, right? The Tezzerator?
It's funny, that was a card that people were very excited about when Charge first came out. A lot of people looked at a lot of different decks. They looked at, oh, can we make a Krark Clan Ironworks deck work?
Oh, nice.
Does he go in this deck? Does he? But, people didn't seem to find the right deck. But the Swedes,
there's a bunch
they found the deck.
There's like 4 guys playing this deck. I think most or all of them have through to day 2. Kenny's sitting on 8-0. It's essentially Trinket Mage and Tezzeret. And, with Tezzeret, you're going to get a bunch of 1-drop artifacts. You can get infinite 0 casting cost artifacts. So in this field, they're throwing out Chalice of the Void. Chaz, Chalice of the Void counters Ancestral Visions? Chalice Zero is sick against the Fairies decks. He ran into 3 Fairies players today and just showed them both sides of his hands. So he smashed Fairies decks. Cool deck with the Trinket Mages. The other thing I saw, and there's all these Elf Ball decks running around, he can go Trinisphere against those guys.
Trinisphere has been a card that has really made its presence felt in this extended format like no extended format before it.
Fair. Totally fair.
So it just shut, like all these decks with rituals or the decks that have just one casting cost creatures.
Yeah, first time I walked by, I thought he was playing a Type 1 deck. He's literally like Chalice, Trinisphere. I guess the Ensnaring Bridge was the tip-off. There must be creatures around there somewhere, but fun deck, awesome deck. You can win by stealing stuff with Vidalcan Shackles. You can win by just turning everybody into a 5/5 with Tezzeret's Ultimate.
So now you're saying his deck is terrific against Fairies.
It does look good against Fairies. Is 3-0 so far, which is not good news for our other undefeated player. Gadiel Slifer shows up to this Pro Tour, shuffles up Fairies, and he's sitting on 8-0. He's been playing tight Magic all weekend. Yeah, he's got to be a little nervous against the matchup first thing tomorrow morning, but still feeling great sitting on 8-0.
Umezawa's Jiddes and Engineered Explosives. Again, cards that deal with that Elf matchup.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
The Elf matchup was like 70 decks on day one.
Yes. And you know what? The other thing is, if you look at the top of the Swiss, they rose. Like that Elf Ball deck, it didn't get to 8-0, but I do feel like, you're going to talk about decks on day one, Elf Ball's clearly the story of the tournament. I like the way you put it, worst kept secret in the game. It's like everybody found this deck, and they're like, maybe we're the only ones, and I think they realized by this morning, no, in fact, everybody found this deck. Right. But it actually is awesome.
Oh, so, it does remarkable things. It wins from nowhere. It can kind of just have a small board and kind of beat down in certain matchups.
Yeah. We can look at the next slide. You'll see a couple of the heart of this engine. Right. The idea is that you get a Heritage Druid or a Birchlore Ranger. Now you can tap your elves for mana. Nettle Sentinel really is sick in this deck. It's really Nettle Sentinel's the engine, because now every time you play an elf, Nettle Sentinel untaps. You tap him for mana again. Play another elf, he untaps. Now you just need a little card drawing engine in there. Glimpse of Nature will do that. Elvish Visionary fits right in and helps. So that engine, you can take it in a bunch of different directions, but that basic engine is just really powerful. And so my read on day one, it seemed like what happened is, okay, a bunch of people showed up with Zoo. Zoo was the most played deck on day one.
120 decks, almost 25% of the field,
and they are not anywhere near 25% of the top tables. I still haven't heard about an extra.
It's more than 25% of day one.
It was like 30% of day one, and they got slaughtered. Like Zoo was what you showed up if you were more or less unprepared. I mean, some people have an affinity for beatdown. You might see one sneak into the top 8, but by and large, Zoo got slaughtered today, and what rose to the top was this elf deck.
Right.
I went down the top tables, like with a round or two to go, and literally every single table seemed to have one. Right. Oh, there's the mirror. Oh, there's one, there's one, there's one, there's one. So, for example, sitting on X and 1, 7 and 1, Minamura, Saito, Luis Scott Vargas, and Sebastian Thaler. Now you might think that's the list of like the big names on 7 and 1, but that's the list of the big names playing Elf Ball on 7 and 1.
Right.
So it is.
I think the story tomorrow about the Elf deck is going to be who came packing for the mirror.
Completely agree. Well, who can beat it? Full stop.
Sure.
Including the mirror. But you look at, like, Jitte, part of the reason Gadiel is sitting 8-0 is that
absolutely.
He's just dismantling that elf deck with Jitte. Umezawa Jitte, it's a little bit slow. Like, the elf deck can go off in, like, 2 turns, but you get time to get a Jitte in there, and it's almost impossible for them to ever fight through it.
I think talking about Oberg's deck, people wrote off Trinket Mage. It's one of these cards, well, I can't get Sensei's Divining Top anymore, How good could Trinket Mage be? Oh, still absurd. It still gets Engineered Explosives.
It does get Engineered Explosives, which is gigantic.
Just you're like, okay, you're going off, blow up your board.
Yep. Engineered Explosive, this huge Trinisphere we talked about. I saw Grand Arbiter Augustine in play against the Elf deck. That'll slow him down a little bit. Jitte. So, Shadow Guildmage I saw come out of a Zoo deck.
Oh, wow.
Shadow Guildmage, it's like, okay, this Zoo player was ready for the Elf. He's picking off one Elf a turn. So, day one was about the Elf deck rising to the top. I think day two is going to be who can beat the Elf deck. Maybe nobody. Like, maybe they take over the top 8. I think it's going to be more, okay, some people knew it was coming. They're set up to beat it. And so the story on day two should be who can beat this Elf deck.
I saw an interesting strategy for beating the Elf deck today.
Okay. I know where you're going. This is awesome story.
This won him back-to-back rounds, actually.
Yes.
Player is playing the Elf deck. He's going off. He's got, a couple Nettle Sentinels in play. He's got a Birchlaw Ranger. He can tap, elves and make mana. And he's got, I believe it's 3 three Nettle Sentinels. So every one mana creature he plays nets him a mana, draws him 3 cards from the Glimpse of Natures he's already played this turn. He's got a ton of elves in his hand. It's actually impossible for him not to draw his entire deck.
Yep.
And
so he demonstrates the loop, right?
And he says,
like, okay, here's my loop. I play this. And I think he did the Hive Mask, the one where you can return an elf.
Sure.
It's a loop.
He says, I've got the loop. I'm just going to do this. And he says, his opponent says, okay, how many times are you going to do it?
Right.
He goes, 1,000,000. And he's like, okay, you lose.
Glimpse of Nature means he draws a card every time through the loop. Yep. He's decked. Judge comes over. He's like, yeah, the guy just decked himself. So the story's not over yet, by the way. The story's not over yet. Consider this a cautionary tale for those of you who are going to play this in the PTQs coming up. Extended.
Yeah, don't do this at home.
You're going to be playing this in the PTQs coming up, or at least playing against it. Maybe you want that lesson too.
Yeah.
Next round, same guy, same matchup. He's playing against the Elf deck again. He gets another guy with the same trick.
The guy only said 200 times, though.
I don't think how many times you're going to go through the loop? 200 times. Okay, you just decked yourself with Glimpse of Nature. Yeah.
Which, it's also a cautionary tale about preparation. Like, you can't just pick up a deck, especially a deck that has some pretty complicated interactions like the Elf deck, and just assume, it's a combo deck, but it's not a traditional combo deck. There are some real limitations to it.
You're playtesting, and you're like, okay, and I've got the loop, and they're like, oh, I'll remember at the Pro Tour.
Yeah.
I'll be thinking at the Pro Tour. I won't steer right. I messed up. I won't be. Got to play tight at this level. So that's the story from day one in Berlin. Deck out of left field, taking over the format, but a lot of other decks out there that look good as well. It's been a lot of fun. Should be a lot more fun tomorrow. The Tezzeret deck is going to be fun to watch. I love the matchup Kenny Oberg's got for this top 8.
And I like Gadiel Slifer staring down the barrel of his, 6th?
Yeah, that's a big
top
name.
8?
It's true.
This guy's clearly one of the all-time greatest players to play the game.
It's a bold statement. I'm sure we'll be having that argument more tomorrow. From Tournament Center, stay tuned. I'm Randy Buehler for Brian David-Marshall. We will see you tomorrow.